I, Grace, take you, David, to be my lawfully wedded husband,
to have and to hold from this day forward,
to have and to hold from this day forward,
for better, for worse.
Stop this wedding right now.
Madam, please, we are in the middle of the vows.
That woman will not marry my son. Not today. Not ever.
Mama, please, not here, not now.
Bring them in. D. David, what is happening?
Nobody is touching my wife.
I did not carry this boy for 9 months to watch him marry a cripple. Carry her out. David, don't let them. Please don't let them.
Let her go. Let her go now. Carry her out.
You will have to carry me out too before I let you marry her. Carry her out.
Move, mother.
What are you doing?
Carrying you out.
My veil, careful.
Almost there. Hold on.
It's tearing, stop.
There. Set.
Somebody help me. I have nowhere to go.
Grace sat alone on the church steps in her torn wedding gown, her wheelchair tilted sideways where the men had dropped it, her veil ripped and lying in the dust beside her like something already dead. Inside the church, she could still hear the muffled sound of shouting, of David's voice rising above her mother's, of the congregation in chaos. But out here, in the golden afternoon light of Enugu, there was only Grace, her ruined gown, and the silence of a wedding that had just been torn apart in front of everyone she knew. 6 months before that day, Grace had been a woman with 2 strong legs and a whole future ahead of her. She and David had done their traditional engagement in a compound full of dancing and drumming, their families exchanging kola nut and blessings, and everyone had said what a beautiful couple they made. Grace worked as a seamstress in Enugu, and David, an engineer with a growing construction firm, had promised her a wedding fit for a queen. They set the date. Grace began preparing fabric, shoes, invitation cards, small chops for the reception, and a wedding gown she was sewing herself, stitch by stitch, in the quiet hours after work. It was on one such errand that everything changed. Grace had gone to Ogbete Market to buy the last of the fabric and beads she needed, her arms already full of nylon bags, her mind replaying David's voice from that morning, laughing about how he could not wait to call her his wife. She was crossing the road near the market junction when a truck, brakes failing on the slope, came barreling towards her faster than she could move. The last thing she remembered before darkness was the scream of tires and someone shouting her name. Grace woke 9 days later in a hospital bed at the University of Nigeria Teaching Hospital, her body wrapped in bandages, her mind foggy from the drugs still in her system. It took her a full minute to understand why her left leg felt wrong beneath the sheets, too light, too far away. When the doctor finally told her, gently, that they had not been able to save the leg below the knee, Grace did not cry immediately. She simply stared at the ceiling and asked one question. Is my baby okay? Because Grace was already carrying David's child, 4 months along, and in that moment, the only thing that mattered to her was that small life still kicking inside her, stubborn and alive despite everything. David came to the hospital every single day. He held her hand through the pain, through the tears, through the nights she woke up screaming from phantom aches in a leg that was no longer there. But her mother, Rebecca, came only once. She stood at the foot of Grace's hospital bed, arms folded over her expensive wrapper, and looked at the bandaged stump with an expression Grace would never forget. Not pity, not concern, but disgust. My son will not marry a cripple, she said flatly, loud enough for the nurses to hear. Ogaraya people do not carry broken things into their family. Find another man, my dear. This one is not for you anymore. David heard those words. He stood in that hospital corridor in front of doctors, nurses, and his own mother, and told her plainly that Grace lost her leg on the very road she had taken to buy things for their wedding, that her blood was on that tarred road because of him and his marriage plans, and he was not now, of all times, going to abandon her because of what that accident cost her. Rebecca wept and raged in equal measure. She swore before God and her ancestors that she would not be alive to watch her son marry that girl. She threatened to disown him, to cut him off from the family land, to curse the marriage from her very womb if it happened. David did not move an inch. He simply took Grace's hand in front of her weeping mother and said, "Mama, I have made my decision. I am marrying Grace." Grace herself was not so sure at first. Lying in that hospital bed, watching David fight his own mother for her sake, she pulled him close one evening and asked him honestly, "Are you sure about this? I don't want you to marry me because you feel guilty. I don't want pity disguised as love." David knelt beside her bed, took both her hands and answered without hesitation, "I am not marrying your leg, Grace. I never was. I am marrying you, your laughter, your strength, the mother of my child. A missing leg does not change any of that." Grace cried that night, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of being loved exactly as she was. The wedding was postponed until Grace completed months of physiotherapy and learned to move confidently with her wheelchair. During that time, something shifted in Rebecca, or so it seemed. She stopped shouting. She started smiling. She even visited Grace's mother personally to help plan the Asuebi colors, hugging her warmly in front of neighbors and declaring that she had made peace with God's plan. David was overjoyed, believing his mother had finally softened. Grace, however, watched Rebecca's eyes rather than her mouth during these visits, and something in them never matched the warmth of her words. She mentioned this quietly to David once. He laughed it off gently and told her she was overthinking things, that his mother simply needed time. The wedding day arrived at last, 6 months after the accident, at St. Peter's Anglican Church in the heart of Enugu. The compound outside was packed with cars, the church itself overflowing with guests in gold and wine and soybean, a live band tuning up for the reception under a white canopy in the churchyard. David's colleagues had traveled down from Lagos and Port Harcourt specially for the occasion. Grace arrived in a hired car decorated with white ribbons, her father wheeling her proudly up the church aisle while the choir sang and guests wiped tears from their eyes at the sight of her radiant smile beneath her veil. When she reached the altar, David knelt so that his eyes were level with hers and whispered, "You are the strongest woman I have ever known, and today the whole world will see it too." The priest began the vows. Grace had just repeated the words "for better or for worse" when the church doors burst open with a force that silenced the entire congregation. Rebecca had spent the morning quietly arranging what came next. She had gone to the market herself and paid 2 hefty men in matching black agbada to do exactly as she commanded, promising them more money than they had ever seen for a single afternoon's work. She timed her entrance perfectly, not before the wedding started, when someone might have stopped her calmly, but in the very middle of the vows, when the shock of it would be greatest and hardest to undo. She marched down the aisle screaming for the wedding to stop, ignoring the priest's protests, ignoring David's pleading, ignoring the horrified gasps of 200 guests. When David moved to block the men from reaching Grace, Rebecca herself threw her body in his path, daring her own son to physically push her mother aside in the house of God. The 2 men reached Grace before anyone could stop them. They lifted her wheelchair, with Grace still strapped into it, still in her white lace gown, still mid-vow, and carried her back down the very aisle she had just been wheeled up in triumph. Grace screamed for David, clawed at the chair's arms, begged the men to put her down, but they did not stop until they reached the heavy wooden doors outside, threw them open, and set the wheelchair down hard on the stone steps outside. The wheel caught her veil and tore it clean from her hair as they turned and walked back inside, leaving her there in the dust. The doors slammed shut behind them, muffling the chaos that erupted within. David furious shouting, guests crying out in outrage, Rebecca's voice still rising above it all, declaring victory. Outside, Grace sat alone on the church steps in her torn gown, her wheelchair tilted at an angle, her veil lying ruined beside her in the dirt. For the first time since the accident, months of swallowed grief broke loose all at once. She screamed into the empty churchyard, not from any pain in her missing leg, but from the deeper wound of being discarded twice by the same family, once quietly in a hospital corridor, and now violently in front of everyone she loved. I have nowhere to go, she wept to no one. You people gave me this wound on the road to your son's wedding, and now you throw me into the street like I chose to lose my leg for you? Inside the church, David finally turned on his mother in front of the entire congregation. He did not shout the way she had. His voice was low and steady and colder than anyone had ever heard it. You have humiliated my wife in the house of God, in front of everyone who loves us. You will apologize to her today, or you will lose your son forever. Choose now, Mama. Rebecca laughed, certain that blood would win, certain David was only performing outrage for the crowd. She told him plainly that he could shout all he wanted, but she would rather bury him than watch him marry that cripple. That was the moment David understood there was no more room for his mother's forgiveness to matter. He walked out of the church himself, past the stunned crowd, out through the doors his mother's hired men had just slammed shut. He found Grace exactly where they had left her, sitting in the dust in her torn gown, shaking. He knelt beside her, gently lifted her back into a properly set wheelchair, wiped the dirt from her face with his own sleeve, and said only, "I am sorry it took me this long. It will never happen again." Then he wheeled her back up the aisle himself, past his mother, past the crowd still frozen in shock, and stood again at the altar. Father Anthony, seeing the resolve on David's face, calmly resumed the ceremony from where it had been broken. Grace's mother stood firmly at the church entrance and physically blocked Rebecca from following them back inside, while David's own father, who had watched his wife's cruelty in silence for months, stood forward and walked Grace the final steps to the altar himself, giving her away in his son's mother's place. Rebecca did not attend her son's reception that evening. She stood outside the church gates as the celebration continued without her, watching through the fence as the band played and her son danced with his new wife in front of the entire family she had tried to tear apart. Word of what she had done spread through Enugu within days, the way shameful stories always travel faster than proud ones. The women's fellowship she had led for years quietly stopped inviting her to meetings. Her own younger sister told her outright that a woman who could order a bride carried out of her own wedding in a wheelchair had no moral standing left to lecture anyone about family honor. 4 months later, Grace gave birth to a healthy, loud daughter they named Chiamaka. God is beautiful, because Grace said beauty had shown up for her exactly when she needed it most, in the shape of a man who chose her fully, wound and all. Rebecca came to the house only once after the birth, quietly, without her gold head ties, without hired men, and asked simply to hold her granddaughter. David let her in without a word. Grace, watching from her wheelchair as Rebecca's hands trembled around the baby, understood that this small, humbled visit was not yet forgiveness, but it was the beginning of the only kind of justice that mattered, watching someone slowly lose everything their cruelty had once protected and come back changed, or not come back at all. Grace never again needed anyone's permission to walk or wheel into a church and belong there. If you are Grace's father, watching those two men carry your daughter out of her own wedding, what would you have done in that moment? Tell us in the comments. If this story touched you, please like and subscribe. Share it with someone who needs it today. And drop a comment. We want to hear from you. God bless you.